The morning had begun like any other at AuralTech, a fast-growing startup that had turned heads in Silicon Valley with its cutting-edge AI communication platform. The hum of computers, the low murmur of engineers collaborating across desks, and the faint smell of roasted coffee beans created a familiar rhythm. But everything changed the moment Vanessa Hart's office door swung open with a sharp intensity. She didn't need to see the expression on the face of the newcomer to know this wasn't a casual visit. The paper slid across her desk was thick, official-looking, the kind designed to intimidate before the words were even read. Vanessa's eyes immediately caught the bold letters. Effective immediately. A single sentence. No explanation, no preamble. Nothing about the $150,000 performance bonus that had been approved weeks earlier, scheduled to hit her account in less than 24 hours. Vanessa had spent the last 12 years building AuralTech from the ground up, guiding it through late-night code reviews, impossible deadlines, and investor meetings that left her voice hoarse and her eyes red from exhaustion. Every milestone the company had achieved, every high-profile client deal, every feature release carried her fingerprints, though most of the world would never know it. The AI algorithms powering the platform, the security protocols protecting sensitive user data, even the critical scalability features, all of it was her creation. She stared at the termination notice, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and quiet fury. This wasn't just about losing a paycheck. It was about erasing years of her life in a single, thoughtless act. A single paper, a single signature, and the last 12 years of effort could be dismissed with the casual precision of a bureaucratic stamp. Vanessa had seen the rise of the company's new leadership before this moment. The board had welcomed a young executive, Emily Rowe, the daughter of a venture capitalist, into the corner office with an almost ceremonial handoff of authority. Emily's resume was impressive on paper, but Vanessa had watched her in meetings, knowing the difference between someone who understood the architecture of a multi-million-dollar startup and someone who had simply learned the buzzwords and stage presence expected in Silicon Valley. This new figure had never been in the trenches, had never spent nights debugging production crashes, had never negotiated contracts where failure wasn't just embarrassing, it could sink the company entirely. As Vanessa picked up the notice, she felt a spark of clarity. They thought they had cornered her. They thought they had neutralized the one person whose work held the company together at its most fragile points. They didn't know about the clause embedded in her original employment contract, a clause designed years ago by the company's founder to protect the integrity of the platform's core technology. It was a safeguard most employees, most executives, and certainly Emily Rowe herself had never read. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene. She simply set the paper down, the edges perfectly aligned with the corner of her desk, and allowed herself a single, quiet breath. In her mind, the countdown had already begun. 24 hours. That was all it would take for the consequences of this move to unfold in ways no one had anticipated. She looked out the window over the city, the skyline familiar yet surreal under the morning sun. A day that had promised routine had transformed into a crucible. Vanessa knew that what came next wouldn't be decided by confrontation or fury. It would be determined by precision, patience, and the meticulous understanding of the system she had built. The hum of AuralTech's servers became almost a heartbeat in the background, a steady rhythm against the storm brewing in her mind. She had 24 hours before the bonus was processed, before the ownership of critical AI algorithms, the very foundation of the $300 million merger the startup had been counting on, could legally shift in ways the board had never foreseen. And for the first time since the notice had hit her desk, Vanessa allowed a slow, private smile to form. They had tried to remove her. They didn't realize they had just triggered the beginning of their own undoing. Vanessa Hart hadn't always been at AuralTech. 12 years ago, the company was nothing more than an idea scribbled on whiteboards in a cramped shared workspace in San Francisco. Back then, it was just a handful of engineers, a visionary founder, and a single server humming in a corner, powering prototypes that barely functioned. Vanessa had been fresh out of college, eager and fearless, drawn to the promise of building something new, something that could reshape the future of communication. From the beginning, she had poured herself into the company, taking responsibility for every critical system, every line of code that determined whether AuralTech could scale or crumble. She remembered the nights spent in the server room, rewiring systems from scratch when a client's platform went offline at 2 in the morning. She remembered the flights across the country, pitching investors, calming anxious partners, and negotiating contracts in corners of coffee shops when the boardroom wasn't available. Every success, every milestone bore her signature. Yet, to the outside world, she was just one of many employees, a dedicated, competent engineer, invisible beneath the title of lead architect. The company grew, and so did the complexity of her work. The AI algorithms Vanessa had helped design became the backbone of products that connected millions of users, handled sensitive corporate communications, and protected proprietary data across industries where failure could mean disaster. Along the way, she had trained a generation of engineers, instilling in them the meticulous care and strategic thinking required to maintain systems at the highest stakes. Her influence ran deeper than anyone realized, threaded into the very DNA of AuralTech. The founder, Jonathan Marks, recognized her value early. He had taken her aside years ago, over takeout from a small Thai restaurant near the office, and spoken in a tone both serious and protective. He had introduced a clause in her contract, unassuming on the surface but profound in its implications. The clause tied the ownership of certain core algorithms, including the AI architecture central to an impending $300 million merger, to her annual performance bonus. Once that bonus was processed, the intellectual property would legally become hers. Marx had whispered to her then, in a quiet mix of mentorship and foresight, that this provision would protect the company's most critical assets, even if the board or a short-sighted executive attempted to mishandle them. Vanessa had filed that conversation away in her mind for years, trusting that it would never be needed. The company had always been stable, and the board had always respected her work. But now, with Emily Rowe's sudden rise to power, everything had changed. Rowe had inherited authority, not built it. She had never experienced the pressures of high-stakes negotiations, the countless hours ensuring that systems worked flawlessly under scrutiny, or the delicate balancing act between technology and business interests. To Vanessa, it was painfully obvious. Emily's understanding of the company's core assets was superficial at best. The merger with AuralTech, a multinational firm, depended entirely on the integrity of AuralTech's AI algorithms. Any disruption in licensing or access to those systems could delay the merger, erode investor confidence, and potentially collapse the deal entirely. Vanessa had always been the linchpin, the person whose expertise guaranteed that every clause, every technical specification, and every operational milestone would align perfectly. Without her, the company was exposed, and now, with the termination notice lying in front of her, she realized that Emily Rowe hadn't just underestimated her. She had triggered a chain reaction that Vanessa had anticipated but never needed to act on until this precise moment. It was a risk born of ignorance, overconfidence, and impatience. The clock was ticking, the bonus processing in less than 24 hours, and with it, the legal shift that could undo a $300 million merger in a heartbeat. Vanessa understood the stakes as clearly as she understood the code she had written. The next 24 hours would not be fought with confrontation or anger. They would be fought with patience, precision, and the quiet application of knowledge that no one else possessed. This was a battle for control, for recognition, for justice. But it would unfold in silence, with the world watching, unaware of the storm about to strike. The morning Vanessa received the termination notice felt unnaturally quiet. The city outside buzzed with life, unaware that within AuralTech's glass and steel headquarters, a crisis was already quietly unfolding. Vanessa didn't react. She didn't shout. She didn't storm out or argue. Instead, she studied the implications with the same precision she applied to every line of code she ever wrote. 24 hours remained before her $150,000 bonus processed. That bonus wasn't just money. It was the trigger for the clause Jonathan Marks had embedded years ago, one designed to secure the company's most sensitive assets in her name. Vanessa's mind mapped the cascade of events. The AuralTech merger was entirely dependent on the AI algorithms she had built, tested, and safeguarded for more than a decade. Any disruption in licensing could halt the integration, delay milestones, and send investors scrambling. Emily Rowe, armed with a false sense of confidence and a stack of PowerPoint slides, had no idea what she was up against. She saw Vanessa's termination as a simple power move, a minor inconvenience. What Emily failed to recognize was the architecture of risk, the hidden contingencies embedded into contracts and code, waiting for the moment to assert themselves. Vanessa began tracing the flow of the merger process in her head. Every deadline, every integration checkpoint, every milestone depended on her continuous presence. She had personally overseen system validations, security verifications, and compliance audits. AuralTech's legal and technical teams had trusted her answers implicitly. Without her, any request for verification could delay approvals, prompt renegotiation, or trigger clauses that allowed AuralTech to withdraw entirely. The realization sharpened her focus. Emily's decision had created a fault line, a critical vulnerability that Vanessa could exploit not through aggression, but through the quiet enforcement of pre-existing systems. The countdown was now a weapon. Each minute brought her closer to the moment when the bonus processed and the intellectual property automatically transferred to her name. In that instant, Emily would not only lose control over the AI algorithms, but also the leverage she had assumed she held over the merger. Vanessa organized her thoughts like code modules in a system she knew intimately. First, she verified the timing and processing of the bonus, confirming the exact legal and operational mechanisms. Then, she reviewed her safeguards, secure backups, encrypted repositories, and multi-layered access controls. Everything was accounted for. Nothing could be accessed or moved without her authorization. She had anticipated the potential for internal chaos and built contingencies accordingly. Despite the stakes, Vanessa remained outwardly calm. She did not call the board or confront Emily. She did not warn AuralTech or the press. Her strategy was patient observation. The very systems and contracts that Emily underestimated would now operate automatically, silently enforcing the consequences of her actions. Vanessa's calm wasn't indecision. It was control. She spent the day meticulously documenting milestones, cross-referencing system logs, and reviewing emails with legal teams. Every touchpoint, every technical specification, every clause was a potential trigger point. The more she observed, the clearer it became. The merger was a house of cards resting on her expertise. Emily's overconfidence had pulled the first card, and the structure was already responding. By late afternoon, Vanessa allowed herself a measured glance at the city beyond her window. The streets were full of commuters, oblivious to the tension that defined the next 24 hours. Inside her apartment, the countdown ticked relentlessly toward the moment when the bonus would process. That moment would shift ownership, realign legal rights, and set the course for the collapse of the merger, not through chaos or confrontation, but through the quiet, inevitable application of rules and systems that no one else fully understood. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, hands clasped, mind alert. The storm had been set in motion. Emily believed she had control, but in reality, she had triggered a sequence she could not reverse. Every passing minute brought Vanessa closer to the tipping point, and all she had to do was wait. As the clock edged closer to the bonus processing hour, the tension in Vanessa's mind was electric, yet controlled. She wasn't panicked, she never panicked, but she was acutely aware of the seismic impact about to ripple through AuralTech and AuralTech. The systems she had built, the contracts she had safeguarded, and the decades of experience she had accumulated were all about to assert themselves in ways Emily Rowe would never anticipate. One wrong move from the unprepared CEO's daughter, and the entire $300 million merger could collapse within hours. Vanessa's phone remained silent, the world around her oblivious. Her apartment, a space of minimal distractions, was bathed in soft light. 2 monitors displayed dashboards she had configured to track every relevant metric: contract clauses, system logs, bonus triggers, and IP verification timelines. Each line of code, each automated email, each time-stamped document was now a cog in a machine that required no intervention from her. The countdown ticked. 2 hours, 37 minutes, 14 seconds. The bonus processed exactly as scheduled. In that instant, Vanessa's name became legally attached to the AI algorithms. The ownership transfer, once just a dormant clause, now executed automatically through encrypted protocols she had designed. A silent email notification went to AuralTech's legal team, confirming the transfer and highlighting the dependency of the ongoing merger on the presence of the newly designated IP holder, Vanessa herself. The machinery of consequence clicked into place. Across town, Emily remained unaware that she had just walked into a trap of her own making. She had assumed that firing Vanessa would prevent her from claiming the bonus and would give Emily unilateral control over AuralTech's critical assets. Instead, she had triggered a chain of events that she could neither reverse nor anticipate. Every system she thought she controlled had been bypassed by preset safeguards, leaving her stranded in a legal and operational blind spot. Within minutes, subtle tremors began in the merger process. AuralTech's legal department requested verification of licensing rights. Internal emails circulated, questions raised about the absence of the key personnel listed in critical contract clauses. Without Vanessa's active authorization, the system flagged the AI algorithms as unavailable for deployment, halting progress automatically. What had seemed like a minor disruption for Emily now carried the weight of a potential 6-month delay. Vanessa observed quietly, drinking cold coffee as she watched the results of her careful preparations unfold. She didn't interfere, she didn't call anyone to explain. The power of the situation lay in her restraint. The automated clauses and protocols did all the work. Emily's overconfidence, her lack of understanding, and her blind assumption that firing Vanessa meant controlling the company were exposed in real time. Investor alerts began filtering in. The news of licensing ambiguities reached financial reporters, generating questions that could not be ignored. Stocks wavered slightly as whispers of the merger's instability spread. The company's leadership scrambled to respond, realizing that their most critical asset, the intellectual property underpinning the merger, was no longer under their unilateral control. Vanessa's calm, her patience, and her foresight had turned a single moment of perceived weakness into a decisive strategic advantage. The systems she built, the contracts she safeguarded, and her meticulous preparation had created an unassailable position. Emily, frantic and unprepared, faced the collapse that had been quietly set in motion long before she had ever walked into the room. By the time the first internal alerts reached AuralTech's boardroom, the outcome was already sealed. Vanessa didn't need to intervene. She didn't need to explain or defend herself. All she did was watch as the silent mechanisms of accountability and contractual design reshaped the landscape, transforming a termination notice into the ultimate proof of her foresight and control. In that moment, the merger that Emily had assumed was unstoppable began to crumble. Not through loud confrontation, but through the quiet, unrelenting execution of systems designed to protect the work, the assets, and the person who had built them from the ground up. Vanessa had set the clock. The countdown had ended. The game had changed. The morning after the automated triggers completed, the corporate landscape felt different. From the outside, AuralTech's headquarters appeared normal. Employees arriving, elevators humming, coffee machines steaming. But inside, the atmosphere was electric with panic and confusion. Vanessa, now officially the owner of the AI algorithms, sat quietly in her apartment, observing from a distance the chaos that had quietly unfolded. She hadn't touched a single system after the trigger. She didn't need to. The contracts and automation she had put in place had done everything for her. Internal communications at AuralTech surged like a rising tide. Board members scrambled to assess the implications of the sudden IP transfer. Legal teams pored over contracts, trying to find a loophole or a way to regain control. But every clause Vanessa had anticipated held firm. Emails flew between departments, the language terse, urgent, unrelenting. Executives who had once considered themselves untouchable now realized that a single oversight had left them exposed. Every plan they had assumed was secure was unraveling under the weight of the system Vanessa had built years ago. Investors reacted quickly. Market feeds lit up with uncertainty, the company's stock dipping as whispers of licensing issues and contractual breaches spread. Financial reporters, having caught wind of the sudden instability, asked questions that the executive team could no longer answer with confidence. Headlines began to emerge. Key licensing question disrupts $300 million merger. CEO daughter faces internal scrutiny after IP transfer. Critical AI asset ownership changes hands. The narrative was out of AuralTech's control. Vanessa, by contrast, felt a quiet satisfaction. There was no celebration, no triumphal posturing. The victory wasn't in making noise. It was in ensuring that the systems she had built, the contracts she had safeguarded, and the foresight she had exercised had executed flawlessly. She had anticipated the moment, set the conditions, and allowed the sequence to play out without interference. Her preparation had done what confrontation could never achieve. She had ensured the protection of her work, her value, and the merger's intellectual assets. Meanwhile, Emily Rowe's panic intensified. Attempts to locate the licensing certificates and bypass the clauses proved futile. Meetings in the boardroom were frantic, with executives questioning how a termination notice could have triggered such far-reaching consequences. Emily's credibility, once unquestioned, now wavered under the scrutiny of the board and the press. Her assumptions about control, power, and competence had been exposed as dangerously incomplete. Vanessa watched the ripple effects with measured detachment. AuralTech's legal team, unaware of the intricate safeguards Vanessa had designed, moved cautiously, trying to resolve ambiguities without direct confrontation. Every email, every internal inquiry, every investor call only reinforced the position she had prepared. The company that had seemed unstoppable was now dependent on the very person it had tried to remove. The paradox was complete. By being forced out, Vanessa had become indispensable in a way Emily could never undo. By mid-afternoon, a quiet shift occurred. Messages began reaching Vanessa from external sources, including AuralTech's CEO, offering to negotiate directly with her. The merger, once locked in to AuralTech, now had a pathway to continue, but under her terms, her control. The opportunity was clear. She could guide the project forward, not as an employee, not under the whim of nepotistic leadership, but as the rightful owner of the technology she had spent years developing. Vanessa allowed herself a single smile. The chaos outside her apartment wasn't hers to manage anymore. The systems she had built, the foresight she had exercised, and the patience she had maintained had done their work. Control had shifted, quietly, definitively, and irrevocably. The fallout was complete. AuralTech scrambled, investors reevaluated, and Vanessa emerged not just unscathed, but empowered. In the quiet of her apartment, she finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The countdown was over, the transfer executed, and the future was hers to shape. For years, she had labored unnoticed, underestimated, and dismissed. And yet, in a single 24-hour window, her preparation had rewritten the rules entirely. The lesson was clear. Patience, foresight, and strategic calm could accomplish what confrontation never could. In the silent aftermath, Vanessa Morgan, once fired, now commanded everything. By the evening, the dust had begun to settle, though the echoes of the day's events still reverberated through AuralTech's offices. Vanessa Morgan, sitting in her quiet apartment, reflected on the last 24 hours with a sense of measured calm. She had not shouted, not fought, not barged into boardrooms demanding recognition. She had allowed systems, contracts, and preparation to do the work. The timing, the legal safeguards, the automated triggers, every detail executed perfectly. And the outcome was undeniable. News feeds now carried the story she had anticipated. AuralTech's $300 million merger was in jeopardy. A key asset had been legally transferred, and the CEO's daughter faced scrutiny for miscalculations. Headlines painted chaos, but Vanessa read them with a detached clarity. The company had underestimated her. They had ignored the depth of her contributions, the foresight encoded in contracts, and the strategic patience she had honed over years of work. Now those same traits had shifted power quietly, irreversibly, into her hands. Messages began to arrive, some congratulatory, others cautious, but all acknowledging her authority over the AI algorithms. Even the CEO of AuralTech reached out, proposing a direct agreement with her, offering her the chance to lead the deployment and future development. The merger, once tied to AuralTech, could continue, but under her terms. Vanessa realized that the very scenario she had feared, being dismissed, erased from the project, had created an unprecedented opportunity. She was no longer just an employee or a subordinate. She was the principal architect of the technology, the guardian of its future, and the one in control. Vanessa's thoughts returned to the countless nights she had spent debugging systems, negotiating overseas contracts, and training junior engineers. Every moment, every sacrifice, every detail she had safeguarded had been instrumental in this outcome. Years of unnoticed diligence had created a foundation so secure that even a sudden termination could not shake it. The sense of vindication was subtle, quiet, and precise. Not the loud triumph she had imagined in her younger years, but a deeper, more enduring victory. She thought about Emily Rowe and the board at AuralTech, scrambling to contain a situation they had never truly understood. They had relied on titles, appearances, and assumed control, but they had overlooked the real asset, the knowledge, experience, and foresight embedded in Vanessa's work. It was a stark reminder that influence does not always align with power, and that the quiet, prepared, and strategic mind can command outcomes that others only attempt to force. For Vanessa, the path ahead was clear. She would take the AI algorithms, the intellectual property she had protected, and move forward on her own terms. Decisions, standards, and execution would reflect her vision alone. There would be challenges, of course, technical hurdles, client negotiations, and investor scrutiny, but she was prepared. Her control was not temporary or reactive. It was legal, structural, and complete. As night fell, Vanessa closed her laptop and looked out at the city lights. The streets hummed with ordinary life, unaware of the shifts in corporate power that had quietly occurred. The lesson she had learned, and now lived, was simple but profound. Preparation, patience, and strategic restraint can achieve far more than confrontation or haste. By stepping back, letting the systems she built work, and trusting her foresight, she had not just protected her work, she had reclaimed her future. In that moment of stillness, with the city below moving unknowingly around her, Vanessa felt a deep, enduring satisfaction. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and cut off, but she had emerged not only intact, but fully in command of the work and the opportunities she had earned. The merger, the technology, and the future were hers to shape, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile, knowing that quiet patience, meticulous preparation, and unwavering competence had produced a victory louder than any shout could ever achieve.